Okay, let's look at page 1 of our study guide. So for any right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and b are legs and c is the hypotenuse. So looking at problem number 1, if you'll notice, here's our right angle, so we know that 9 and 17 are the legs. Across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. So we're going to have a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or 81 plus 289 is c squared. Let's add these two together to get 370. Now we have c squared, what we need is c. So to undo a square, remember to take the square root. Now if you list the factors of 370, trying to break down to your row of primes, you have 2 and 1, 8, 5. So that'll be 2 and 5 and 37, okay? So let's double check that and make sure everything is correct. 2 times 5 times 37 is going to give us 370. So we cannot make a double, so that tells me that the square root of 370 will not simplify. So we get c is equal to the square root of 370, and when you plug that into your calculator, you'll get 19 and 2/10. So this is your precise answer. This is your decimal answer. And of course it's rounded. Now looking at number 2, you'll see that this right here is a leg. So we're looking for a leg. This value is directly across from my right angle, which is my hypotenuse. So we have a squared plus b squared is equal to our hypotenuse squared. So a squared plus 121 is equal to 196. Now let's get a squared by itself by subtracting 121 from both sides. So we get a squared is equal to 75. Let's take the square root on both sides, and we'll get a is. Now let's see what we can do with this 75. We know that 75 is 25 times 3, which is 5 times 5 times 3. So let's pair up our 5 and bring it out and leave the 3 behind. So the simplified radical is 5 square roots of 3. Now if you plug this into your calculator, the square root of 75, or 5 times the square root of 3, rounded to 1 decimal place, will give you 1 7/10. Number 3, once again, we're looking for a leg. So we have a squared plus b squared, our other leg is 6 8/10 squared, is equal to our hypotenuse, which is 8 1/10 squared. So let's multiply these values out. 6 8/10 times 6 8/10 will give you 46 24/100. 8 1/10 times 8 1/10 will give you 65 61/100. Once again, let's get that leg by itself by subtracting 46 24/100 from both sides. So subtract these values. We're going to borrow right here and make this a 5 to make this an 11. Then we're going to borrow and make this a 5 to make this a 15. So 11 minus 4 is 7. 5 minus 2 is 3. Bring down your decimal. 15 minus 6 is 9. And 5 minus 4 is 1. Take your square root. Because it's a decimal, we're not going to try to simplify a radical, of course. So when we take our square root here, we're going to get x is equal to 4 4/10. Okay, looking at number 4, this is not a right triangle, but when you drop your altitude, it makes a right triangle. So what I can do with this being 18 and this is 3, I'm going to label this y, and I'm going to find this. So we'll have y squared plus my other leg, which is 13 squared, is equal to my hypotenuse, which is 18 squared. 13 squared is 169. 18 squared is 324. Let's subtract this from both sides. Okay, let's borrow from this to make that a 14, and let's borrow from this to make that an 11. 14 minus 9 is 5. 11 minus 6 is 5, and then 7 minus 1, oh, I'm sorry, 2 minus 1 is 1. Let's take the square root on both sides, and I'm going to go ahead and do the decimal answer instead of a simplified radical. And this is going to give me 12 and 4/10. Now you can take 12 and 4/10 and add it to 12 and 4/10 to get 24 and 8/10. Now, if you look at how I did this one, I rounded my radical, but if you plug it into the calculator as a radical, if you know that y is the square root of 155, and if you do 2 times the square root of 155, that is actually going to give you 24.9 instead of 24.8, and that would only be rounding 1 time instead of using 2 rounded answers. Number 5, an Olympic-sized swimming pool is approximately 50 meters long, so let's make our swimming pool in the shape of a rectangle. It's 50 meters long and 25 meters wide. What distance will a swimmer travel if they swim from one corner to the opposite? So that's a diagonal, which is also a hypotenuse. So using the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or 2,500 plus 625 is c squared. Okay, add all that together and you're going to get 3,125 is equal to c squared. As you take the square root of each side, you'll get c is equal to 55 and 9/10 meters. Make sure you put your unit of measure because you know what it is. Okay, so we have a 20-foot ramp is used at the loading dock of a factory. The base of the ramp is placed 19 feet from the base of the dock. So we'll let this be our dock. So 19 feet from the base of the dock. That will create our right angle. We want to know how high is the loading dock. That's going to be our vertical. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or x squared plus 19 squared is 361. 20 squared is 400. Let's get that x squared by itself by subtracting 361 from both sides. 10 minus 1 is going to give me 9. 9 minus 6 is 3. So we have x squared equals 39. If you take the square root, you'll find that x is equal to 6 and 2/10. And since we're talking about feet, that's your unit of measure. All right, given a triangle with side lengths A, B, and C, if you're going to have a right triangle, we know that c squared has to equal a squared plus b squared, which of course is our Pythagorean theorem that we use on right triangles. Next, we have c squared, since we're looking for an acute angle, will be less than a squared plus b squared. And then when you look for an obtuse triangle, you'll say that c squared is greater than a squared plus b squared. And don't forget, in order to see if a trio of numbers makes a triangle, you have to take the two smaller sides and add them together, and they should be greater than your third largest side. So looking at number 21, the first thing I'm going to do is see if it's a triangle. So 20 plus 21 should be greater than 29, and it is. So I know I have a triangle. Now let's see what kind of triangle. So c squared, we don't know if it's equal, less, or greater, and then 20 squared plus 21 squared. So 29 squared is 29 times 29, or 841. And then 20 squared we know is 400, and then 21 squared we know is 441. Add those two together, and you'll see that these two are equal. If they are equal, you have a right triangle. Now let's look at number 8. The sum of the two smaller sides should be greater than the largest side. So 5 plus 9 is 14. So we know we have a triangle. So now let's do c squared compared to a squared plus b squared. So 100, 25, and 81. So 100 is actually less than 106. So that tells me that I have an acute triangle. So this is page 1 of our study guide.